Something happened to the Iranian military last week that matters far beyond Iran. Not because the damage was bigger than anything the region has ever seen. Not because the United States used more force than anyone expected. Because in the span of a single campaign window, America appears to have shown 3 different ways modern defenses can become obsolete faster than their owners expected. That is the story. Iran did not just get hit. Iran got hit by a future it was not ready for. And the dangerous part is that each piece of that future attacked a different assumption at the same time. The first assumption was range, the second was cost, the third was familiarity. And by the time Tehran started understanding what was happening, the battlefield logic it had prepared for was already slipping away. Start with range. For decades, one of the foundations of American ground launch strike power was ACMs. It had a strong record, it had history, it had proven itself in war. But weapons age twice. First in hardware, then in predictability. Once an enemy has studied a system for long enough, range profile and reaction windows stop being mysteries and start becoming calculations. That is why the PRSM matters. Not because it is merely newer than ATACMs, because it changes the geometry of the battlefield without forcing the army to rebuild its launch architecture from scratch. That part is crucial. The PRSM fits into the same HIMARS family of launchers already fielded across the US military and allied forces. The launcher stays, the crews stay, the infrastructure stays, the missile changes. That means the capability can spread fast because it does not need a whole new ecosystem to make it real. And the missile itself is smaller and more efficient in the way that really matters. Where one launcher pod once held 1 ATACMs, it can now hold 2 PRSMs. That means more reach and more density at the same time. The importance of that cannot be overstated. A launcher that already existed in the battle space suddenly carries a deeper strike option and more rounds of it. That changes targeting pressure immediately. The enemy is no longer dealing with the older mental map of what a launcher can do. It is dealing with a launcher whose practical strike problem has multiplied. And that is exactly why PRSM-S combat debut matters. Its use in Operation Epic Fury took it out of the realm of concept and placed it in the only realm that matters, which is live war. In a fight like Iran, where many of the most important targets are time-sensitive speed and range, do not simply add convenience. They erase reaction time. Air defenses, radar nodes, launch systems, and command points become harder to save because the clock between launch and impact gets compressed. That is the first broken assumption. Range no longer means what it used to. Now go to the second assumption. Cost. For years, one of Iran's most interesting military strengths was not that it had the most advanced technology. It was that it found ways to make cheap systems strategically painful. The Shah drone became important precisely because it forced richer and more technologically sophisticated opponents to spend heavily defending against something that was relatively cheap to build and easy to mass. That was smart. It was also supposed to be an asymmetric comfort zone for Iran. Then America took the same basic logic, reverse, engineered it, industrialized it, and sent it back. That is what makes Lucas so significant. The Lucas drone is not important because it is mysterious. It is important because it appears to take the low-cost one-way attack drone concept and improve the parts that matter most in combat. Better optics, better flexibility, better networking, better redirection in flight, better usefulness. That is the key. Cheap is one thing, cheap and adaptable is another. A one-way drone is already a battlefield irritant if you can build it in large numbers. A one-way drone with onboard imaging and satellite connectivity becomes more than an irritant because it can be redirected, retasked, and integrated into a more flexible strike logic after launch. That changes what a cheap drone means. And once the cost remains low while the usefulness rises, the old comfort some militaries felt about asymmetry starts collapsing, because now the rich military is no longer answering cheap mass only with exquisite expense. Now it is fighting cheap with cheap, but cheap upgraded by a bigger industrial base and better networks. That is a major shift. Lucas reportedly costs around $35,000 per unit. That matters because it implies scale. Scale means saturation. Scale means repeated use. Scale means the United States is no longer trapped in the old image of a military that can only respond to low-cost threats with missiles and aircraft so expensive that the exchange ratio becomes absurd. That is the second broken assumption. Cheap drone warfare no longer belongs only to the asymmetric side. Now go to the third assumption, familiarity. This may be the most unsettling one, because it is where defenders often make their biggest mistake. They tell themselves that old weapons are understood weapons, that a system with decades of service history has few surprises left in it, that a Tomahawk is a Tomahawk. Then the imagery from Operation Epic Fury appeared, and the Tomahawks were black. That sounds small until you understand what the color likely implies. Not paint for appearance, paint for signature, a low, observable treatment more closely associated with weapons like LRASM than with the older Tomahawk image burned into analysts. Heads over 4 decades, if that is what those missiles were carrying, then the implication is obvious and severe. A defender that already had a narrow window to detect and react now has an even narrower one. That changes everything. Because air defense networks are not magical. They are built around timing assumptions. What does the threat look like? When does it appear? How quickly does the signature firm up? How long does the system have to classify, track, and engage? If a familiar missile starts showing up later, dimmer or less clearly than the defense was built to expect, then the system is not just stressed. It is solving the wrong problem. That is the third broken assumption. Familiar weapons may no longer behave in familiar ways. And now step back. This is why the story is not 3 weapons. It is 3 assumptions collapsing in the same campaign range no longer means what it used to. Cheap mass no longer belongs only to the weaker side. And old signatures may no longer be trustworthy guides to what is coming. That is what happened to Iran. Its commanders did not just face new tools, they faced a new tempo of adaptation. That may be the most important lesson in the whole story. Because military advantage is no longer just about having the best platform in a vacuum, it is increasingly about how quickly you can turn a new capability or an upgraded capability into real battlefield reality before the enemy has stabilized its defenses around it. That is what these 3 systems together seem to show. PRSM says America is extending ground. Launch strike in a way that changes how geography works. Lucas says America is taking the enemy S-low cost logic, improving it, and industrializing it at scale. The Black Tomahawk says even legacy weapons may now be entering battle with changed signatures and reduced reaction windows. That is not a normal modernization story. That is rapid battlefield iteration. And rapid battlefield iteration is exactly what large, heavily prepared defense systems hate most. Because it means the Defender S doctrine starts aging faster than the Defender S hardware budget can keep up. That is why this is bigger than Iran. Russia is watching this. China is watching this. Every military that has invested heavily in air defense, anti-excess systems, and assumptions about how American force will present itself is watching this. And what they are seeing is not just another example of U.S. military power. They already knew the U.S. had power. What they are seeing is something more uncomfortable. The possibility that America is entering a phase where it can update its strike logic faster than rivals can update their defensive expectations. That is a dangerous place for any adversary to be, because war punishes the side that prepares for the previous version of its enemy. And that may be what happened to Tehran. Iran did not just get struck. It got hit by a version of American warfighting that was newer, faster, and less familiar than the one it had spent years preparing for. The PRSM reached farther and denser than the old map suggested. Lucas proved that cheap one-way drone warfare is no longer a comfort zone Iran can call its own. And the Black Tomahawk suggested that even the best-known missile in America, S inventory, may now be arriving under a different visibility logic than the Defender trained for. That is not one surprise, that is a collapse in assumptions. And collapses in assumptions are what decide wars before the casualty charts finish updating. So the real story is not simply that America used 3 weapons. The real story is that America may have shown in a single campaign how quickly old defensive logic can become unreliable when new range, new cost structures, and new low. Observable upgrades hit the field together. That is why Tehran was not ready. And that is why every other serious military is paying attention right now. Because the most dangerous thing about American power may no longer be a single aircraft, a single ship, or a single missile. It may be the speed with which the system as a whole is learning to change faster than its adversaries can catch up.